Mouthwashing is an indie horror game developed by Wrong Organ and published by Critical Reflex in 2024. It's the story of a crew of 5 who are on a delivery job when, unexpectedly, the ship crashes into an asteroid, wounding one member irreparably and leaving the other 4 to figure out how to coexist. There are a few months' worth of rations, but with no way to signal for help, the writing is on the wall for the crew. The game is primarily what I consider to be a walking sim. You bounce from room to room, discussing the situation and completing various tasks to complete scenes. Mouthwashing tells its story through perspective changes and time skips, sometimes going forwards and sometimes going backwards. It is in that way a tale with an unreliable narrator, telling us what is essentially a pretty straightforward story through creative lensing. There are 2 sections of the game where it brings in some actual gameplay mechanics, but these are to the game's detriment. They aren't long and in no way sully how I feel about the game, but I'm just judging what is on the plate here. I typically don't really like walking sims, but I've recently been slamming so much Deadlock, WoW Classic, and Path of Exile 2 that I desperately felt the need for a game with some thought-provoking writing that didn't take 100 hours to finish. Mouthwashing is a game that I completed in just over 2 hours, and I can safely say this game is a masterclass in pacing and editing. Not a single scene or line of dialogue feels without purpose or wasted. It's one of the leanest games I've ever played, and it should be absolutely celebrated for it. If that sounds good to you, I think you should stop watching now and buy it. It's a game that's hard to talk about without spoiling, so I'm going to spoil. Even the little things like who is who, what characters are like, and what led them to their current situation are things that should be experienced blind. Seriously, that was your warning. I didn't experience it completely blind, having heard a little bit about the game already. It didn't ruin anything, but I was a little like Roy from the IT crowd when someone told him there was a twist. I was constantly looking for it throughout. Alright, so as I've said ad nauseum, this game is a walking sim, a genre I'm not generally a fan of. I play games for fun mechanics, and generally I'd like the story to be told through the mechanics as well as the supplementing materials. Despite this dislike, this game hit me hard. Something I really enjoyed about this game is how it's told through its characters over different time periods, rather than finding notes or audio logs. To me, it feels more natural for the game to skip all over the place rather than me finding notes of an aftermath of something. Another thing I enjoyed is there are basically no puzzles in the game. Sometimes there is some really basic deduction to be done. For example, there is a locked door and you need the code. You see a sign that says captain only, so you use your captain only scanner to get the code. It's all very simple. I mentioned the 2 sections with some actual gameplay in them, and they're both pretty bad, and almost managed to hurt the pacing of the game, but they do serve a purpose. It's just they could have been handled better. There is a sneaking section which requires you to stop whenever the monster gets close. This articulates as you taking a few steps, the monster rushing towards you, and then you stopping until it goes away. It's not engaging and it was unfun, but it did manage to convey how horrified a certain character was of something. My interpretation of this scene is that it's how Jimmy made Anya feel. If she made any noise, this beast would come for her and repeat, "Be quiet." I've only played through the game once and was a little confused by this scene, so if you have any thoughts about it, please let me know. The other is a scene of Swansea chasing our character through a graveyard, and you have to shoot him a few times to end the scene. This one isn't as bad, because as gamers, you put a gun in front of us in a first-person scene, we know what to do. I guess it just feels odd to be asked to do these janky and under-explained sections, as it's not exactly what I think most people are playing the game for. I suppose they add some shock horror to a game that is, for the most part, just a psychological horror. They don't hurt the experience by any means, and I've got no suggestions really on how I'd convey the same feelings in a different way. It just is what it is. That's the gameplay for the most part. Walking, talking, and the occasional sneaking and shooting. Presentation-wise, and I think Mouthwashing is very strong. The 5 characters, and Polly, have lots of details, and what's more impressive, how much of their personality is conveyed by their design. Anya looks shaken, Swansea looks old and gruff, Jimmy's jumpsuit makes him look a bit like a criminal, and Dasuki's hair and outfit shows he's carefree. Well, Curley, both of his iterations say a lot. And of course, there's also Polly, Pony Express's mascot that is all over the ship with company messaging. Just looks punchable to me. The environments of the game look great, notably some of the dream sequences. The atmosphere is massively enhanced by the game's sound design, with carefully placed tracks throughout, as well as tons of scary ambient sounds that give life to the ship. What makes Mouthwashing a truly fantastic video game is its story, framing, and pacing. While I'd probably give this game an 8.5 out of 10, it was a truly affecting story. A day after finishing it, I feel like I have a mouthwash hangover. The game's plot is pretty straightforward, but it covers a lot of ground theme-wise in its short runtime. It's an ultimately human story, told through explorations of different characters. It's a workplace story, each character having their own outlook, but having to share the same habitat together. It's got a lot of humor and sharp writing to it. The big reveal of the cargo took me to surprise and had me smiling ear to ear. The fact that these 5 people are all going to die just to deliver some mouthwash is a pretty sweet burn on capitalism. The premise of the story is a ship for a space freighter company, Pony Express, is out making a delivery. The ship is crewed by 5 people: Curley, Jimmy, Anya, Dasuki, and Swansea. At some point during the voyage, we are led to believe that the captain, Curley, for whatever reason, crashed the freighter into an asteroid. This caused the ship to deploy a kind of structure repair foam, patching any possible air leaks, allowing the crew to continue living as long as they have rations. Unfortunately, Curley was horrifically injured in the crash, so Jimmy decides to step up as captain. We spend most of the game bouncing between the perspective of Jimmy and Curley in a number of different moments in time. The game bounces quickly between scenes, giving us glimpses into the relationships the crew has with one another. The game starts relatively light even after the crash, but things take a pretty dark turn when the crew decides to look what they've been hauling this entire time. They hoped it would be food or medicine, something they could use to survive, but it turns out their entire cargo hold is full of mouthwash. This sends most of the crew into a dark spiral, as they begun drinking the mouthwash to get wasted. We continue to go back and forth in time, from a week before the crash to 5 months after it. Things get pretty twisted, and what becomes clear pretty quickly is that our main point of view character, Jimmy, is a pretty fucking awful dude. See, in the beginning of the game, we were led to believe that Curley caused the crash. This is what the crew believed after all, but through flashbacks we eventually learned that it was Jimmy. Jimmy is the co-pilot on the ship and enjoys the power the position affords him. Off the ship, he's a bit of a loser who has struggled through life, but through his friendship with Curley, managed the position he did. He's an important person on the ship, and he likes that fact. At some point during the voyage, Jimmy rapes his crewmate Anya, causing her to become pregnant. It gets worse. Curley, by all accounts, is a pretty stand-up dude and an even better captain. People like and look up to him. Anya even trusts him enough to confide with him that Jimmy sexually assaulted her. Curley, thinking he knows Jimmy pretty well, basically tells Anya to cool it and he'll take care of Jimmy. By taking care of Jimmy, he means giving Jimmy a pep talk and doing absolutely nothing about it. Curley now also goes in the piece of shit bucket next to Jimmy, but that isn't to say Curley doesn't care. He's weak and lenient. A few months later, we learn that Pony Express has gone bankrupt, and this will be its final voyage. The letter from corporate explicitly said Curley is to wait until they are close to their destination to share the news, but Curley believes he owes the crew better. Curley, being an accomplished captain, will land on his feet, but the same cannot be said for Jimmy. Without this job, Jimmy will be back to being a nobody on Struggle Street. Another time skip, and Anya discovers she is pregnant, which she then tells Curley. Again, Curley tells Anya to cool it while he talks to Jimmy, but she tells Jimmy about the unborn child before Curley can get to him. In this moment, it becomes clear to Jimmy that upon noticing Anya's pregnancy when they reach the destination, he will be ousted as a rapist. Anya, frightened by Jimmy's reaction to the news, hides away the only gun on the ship so Jimmy cannot get to it. In response, Jimmy decides that the best way to handle it is to crash the ship, killing all and keeping his dark deeds a secret. Curley, in the final moments before the crash, manages to steer the ship and then land them in a less deadly manner. While he probably would have preferred they died in the crash, by causing it, Jimmy got what he wanted. He was now the captain, and his word was law. Curley is unable to speak, and Anya too afraid of Jimmy to possibly stand against him. Jimmy has completely avoided taking any responsibility for his actions. There is a lot more to this story. I've barely mentioned Swansea or Dasuki, or the horrors that occur the months after the crash. Don't get me wrong though, both of those characters are fantastic and important to the story, but that's because at the heart of the story is Jimmy's complete inability to see how his actions affect those around him. His total denial of responsibility and cowardice that cause him not only to ruin his life, but of all those around him too. I paid 19 Australian dollars for this game, and it felt like participating in a great sci-fi horror to me. It felt like going to the movies. While I generally don't play these kinds of narrative games every day, I'm really glad I played this one. If you've watched up until this point, I'm going to assume you played it too, so congratulations on having experienced this game. After writing the bulk of this, I went to load up Path of Exile and it kind of felt meaningless. This isn't my most extensive review, but after playing this I just had to type out some thoughts. I have a mouthwashing hangover, and I can't wait to see what this studio does next. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next video.